So let's start to dive into Houdini, and before we begin I want to say that you can do all of this tutorial with Houdini Apprentice, and I will give you a link in the description to download it. And also, if you are already familiar with Houdini, I suggest maybe just look at the file and just copy the node, because it will be easier for you, because I will really get into the detail, because this will be a really beginner Houdini tutorial. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the interface. If you download Houdini, you should start up with something like this. And what I'm going to do is, if I go into build here, I'm going to create a new desktop. That way everything goes away. And I'm going to click on this little button here on the top right of the viewport. And I'm going to split the pane left and right 2 times. And I'm going to right click on the title and make this one a network view, and make this one a parameter view. So that way I have 3 windows: a scene view, a network view, and a parameters view. And lastly, I'm going to click on the little bar on the left here to disable the timeline. The first thing we need to do is to load our mesh, and if you are not familiar with Houdini, you need to be aware of context. So when you work in Houdini, you are always in a certain context. And right now, if I look at my network view, I have a bunch of different contexts here, and I'm in OBJ context. So that means I'm basically working on my scene, or the object in my scene. So they can be like lights, objects, or dummies, or whatever, but just an object at the scene level. And you can actually see on the right, on top right, you can see you are in the scene level. And if I want to work with geometry, I need to get into geometry level. And to do this, I can just drop down a geometry node, and that will create an object in my scene. So now I can move this object in my scene, but I'm still in the scene level. And if I double click on this object, which is called geometry, you will see that now I'm not in scene level anymore, I'm geometry level. And there is one node created by default, which is a file node. And I'm going to delete it. Now that we are in geometry level, we can do a lot of actual geometry stuff. So for example, create a box, or do extrusion, or all the geometry operation. And you will see in a lot of Houdini tutorials, people usually say SOP. So SOP means surface operator, and in Houdini, geometry level is usually called SOP. So we are in the surface level, if you want. So geometry level. And I'm going to start with a file node. So this node will allow you to load and export files. A lot of nodes in Houdini do what they do, and they also do the inverse. So the file can import and export also. And I'm going to call this imported mesh. And I'm going to load my mesh, and I will provide this mesh if you want to try with it, but feel free to try with any mesh you want. And this is a mesh I did for another project, so you can do whatever you want, but if you use it for a project, please credit me, but it's not a really good mesh, so I'm not sure what you will do with it. Anyway, so now that I have my mesh, if I put my mouse above the viewport and I hit space F, okay, I can now, it will focus the object, okay, it will frame the object, so space F. And it's important that you have your mouse above the viewport, because in Houdini, the hotkeys are context sensitive, okay? If I do a hotkey here above the viewport and above the network, it won't do the same thing. And now what I want to do is, because this mesh was made from in 3ds Max, it's actually not at the right scale. And just to prove that, I'm going to, if I hit tab or right click in the network, I can have the node list. And I'm going to create a box. So now that I have a box, I can click on this little button, the rightmost button, the blue button, to display my box. And same thing, if I hit space F, I can see my box. And if I click on the purple button, it will template the other object. So what does that mean? It means that it should appear in a wireframe mode. So right now I think it's not happening. It happens sometime in Houdini when you have a bug like this. Just create a new scene view, basically. So you can just delete the old one, you can go back here, and now you can see I have my box here, and in wireframe I can see that my scene is really big. So what I can do is, I just want to scale it. I'm going to put down a transform. So the transform is really handy when you want to move, scale, rotate, or any transformation operation. and I think it's going to be something like 0.01. And you can see I still see the wireframe of the original mesh because I dropped the new mesh, so I have the blue icon, so that means I'm actually viewing this object. But the purple one means I'm still having the old one as a template, so as a wireframe. And if I unclick this, you can see it disappear. And if I check the template on the box, you can see now it's roughly the same size. And maybe if I have time, I will make another video on how to normalize the scale of a mesh automatically, but let's not get into that. So we have our mesh now, which is at the correct size. What I want to do, if you remember the previous step, I'm going to create the sampling points. I want to have them. I want to divide my space in a in a uniform grid basically. So since it's 3D, I want like a 3D grid, and there is a really nice node for that. In Houdini, it's called points from volume, and it needs an input. And just to show you what it does, if I put a box here, okay, so this is my box, and if I put a box, it will interpret it as a volume. It creates a lot of points inside. Okay, so it will just fill the space, fill the volume with a grid of points, and I can change the space between those. The point separation, it controls the separation, the space between each point. So if you put it too low, Houdini will have a really hard time doing it, so be careful with this value. And as you can see, it needs a box, volume, sorry, but we can easily create a volume out of a mesh in Houdini. If we just create a box and input a mesh in it, it automatically creates a bounding box, basically. It will create a box that encapsulates your object. And another way to do this would be to create a bound. So bound, it creates a bounding box, basically. But you have a little more option in it. So you can make oriented bounding box and all this cool stuff. But we'll just use bound because it's maybe cleaner. I'm going to create this create bounding box. Okay, and a bounding box. And now if I just plug my point from my bounding box into my points from volume, I should have something like this. Okay, I will lower the point separation, maybe 0.3. Yeah, if I click this little button here, I can have a little blue highlight on my points, which is really handy. So now I can see that I have a lot of points in my volume. So this will be our sampling points. And finally, what I'm going to do, I need to create a place to store the data. If you remember on the interactive thing I did before, we counted the vertices and we displayed the number of vertices around each sampling point. So it was like 5, 8, 11, etc. So we need a place on each of those points to store this data. And in Houdini, when you want to work with data, you work with attributes. And if you want to view attributes, you have to create a new tab, and you have to go into the geometry spreadsheet. Okay. There are multiple ways to view attribute, but I'm just showing this one. And by default, you can access different level of your mesh. So this tab will change depending on the mesh you have selected. If you see like this. So if I just select the point from volume, I can have different context. Okay, I can have my points, I can have my vertices, I can have my faces and my details. So let's just focus on the point right now. And one line is 1 point. So you can see I have basically I have 400 points. Okay. And the only attribute I have right now is P, and in Houdini, P is basically the position. So I have the position in X, the position in Y, and the position in Z. So if I just take 1 point, for example, let's select one. This one, for example. So I have this point, and if I go into my geometry spreadsheet and I just scroll down, I can say I have this point selected, so it's point number 339, and this is its position. And the cool thing in Houdini is that I can create attributes. So basically, will just show you how to do that. So if I just put down an attribute create, so this node now will create an attribute. And if you look at the parameters view, I can give a name. I can give a name to this attribute. So let's call it, for example, can be whatever you want. So you know what? Let's call it first name. This is just to show you don't have to do it. And I want to say on which context I want to store this attribute. So let's say on point. So what does that mean? That means each point of this mesh basically will have an attribute called first name. And what type will it be? It can be a float, integer. You have a bunch of types. And just for fun, let's try string. So if I say Bob, for example, now each one of those points has an attribute called Bob, okay? So right now it's not really useful because all of them have the same name. So this first name attribute, but let's say you do a lot of complicated stuff and each point has a different name. You can use this name to do whatever you want. And for our purpose, what we want is not a string attribute, it's an integer, so it's just numbers basically, but not floating point number, just full numbers. And we are going to call this density, okay? Or let's be even clearer, let's call it counted vertex. So in here, in this attribute, so right now it's default at 0, each point, each sampling point will store how many vertices are there near it, basically. Okay, so let's call this create attribute. And I'm going to select all of them and just click the create network box and expand this. I want to keep it really clean. And I'm going to call this generate sampling points. And if I hit C on my keyboard, I can have the color palette and I can just drag and drop a color here. So that way I can keep everything organized. And right away I'm going to save my file because I didn't do it. And let's call it Vertex Heatmap. Okay, so now I have my file. Now that I have the density, we need to actually count from each of those points how many vertices are there around. So let's do that right now.